we are in our 6th week already of our King David series called From Shepherd to King. And so each week, I think anyway, we've looked at some interesting events that have happened and taken place in the life of David. And it doesn't stop. Basically, in a nutshell, during this first 5 weeks, we saw David go from this simple shepherd boy to king. But as we saw last week, it took 15 years of waiting for David. From the time the prophet Samuel came and anointed this young shepherd boy to be the future king, he had to wait 15 years until King Saul was killed in battle. And during that time, as we've seen, David had to go through a lot of crazy things while he fled for his life and just tried to survive. We've seen that in this series. Last week we saw that the time had finally come for the chosen one, that David was crowned king. But he was only king over Judah. At that time, the men of the tribe of Judah made David the king. But we didn't see last week that he wasn't named king over all of Israel yet. And as if he hasn't waited enough already, David has to wait another 7.5 years to be the king over all of Israel. Now today what we're going to see is David's big move. And the big move that we're going to see David make today, it's a move that was great for Israel at the time, and it's still great for Israel today. And so as we start this, let's remember that David is king of Judah only at this time. Being king, they say, can go to people's heads. Power can corrupt people. You can see that all over. And they say that absolute power corrupts absolutely. So, kings and queens throughout all of history, they've been famous for just killing people who stepped in their way, or people who disagreed with them, or sometimes even just people maybe who got on their nerves. Who knows? However, David was different, as we've seen. Even though he was so powerful, even before he became king, even though he was so loved by the people in Israel, he goes about his life with humility, compassion, love, self-control, and he's always known and has been known as a man after God's own heart. Not perfect, not sinless. He had his faults, and we'll see that as well. But he had a lot of great qualities. Now, the reason that David was only king of Judah at this time was because a man named Abner. Abner was the commander of Saul's army. And so Abner takes this man named Ishbosheth. He's one of the sons of Saul. And Abner makes him the king in all of Israel. The only place that he wasn't king was in Judah. The tribe of Judah had made David their king. To make a long story short, in 2 Samuel, from basically the 3rd chapter and 4th chapter, Ishbosheth was murdered in the 4th chapter, and this is what happens next as we open 2 Samuel chapter 5, verses 1 through 5. Then all the tribes of Israel came to David at Hebron and said, "Behold, we are your bone and your flesh. Previously, when Saul was king over us, you were the one who led Israel out and in. And the Lord said to you, you will shepherd my people Israel, and you will be a ruler over Israel." So all the elders of Israel came to the king at Hebron, and King David made a covenant with them before the Lord at Hebron. Then they anointed David king over Israel. David was 30 years old when he became king, and he reigned 40 years. At Hebron, he reigned over Judah 7 years and 6 months. And in Jerusalem, he reigned 33 years over all Israel and Judah. So once again, David had to wait 7.5 years to become full king, the one that God had anointed. Now, maybe you noticed there that David, in the very first verse, it says he ruled over just Judah. When he ruled there, his capital city was Hebron. That's how I say it. Last week we saw that Hebron was the city that God told David to go to when David asked God shall I go up to one of the cities in Judah? And once he did it, he asked God this when he found out that Saul was dead. Hebron was a significant city in Judah. Abraham had spent some time there as well. He built an altar there when his wife Sarah died, and Sarah was buried in that area. This also was the city that Caleb was given as an inheritance from the Lord. Caleb was one of those 12 spies that was sent into the land of Canaan to spy it out back in the book of Numbers. And he was one of the only 2 that came back with a good report. Later, it would become one of the cities of refuge and would belong to the descendants of the high priest. So Hebron at this time has a long and important history for the Israelites, especially that tribe of Judah. But what we're going to see today is that when David becomes king over Israel, over all of Israel, all the country, he moves that capital city to Jerusalem. This is the big move that David makes that is so important, making Jerusalem the capital city of Israel. And to make this happen, David battles the Jebusites. At this time, though Jerusalem is in the land that God had given to the Israelites, Jerusalem was not an Israelite city, even though it's within their land, their country. It was a great fortified city within Israel territory, but it was controlled by the Jebusites, which was a problem. The Jebusites were some of the original inhabitants of the land. This immediately becomes a priority for David when he becomes king over Israel. In the 6th verse of the 5th chapter, we can read this. Now the king and his men went to Jerusalem against the Jebusites, the inhabitants of the land. And they said to David, you shall not come in here, but the blind and lame will turn you away, thinking David cannot enter here. Now let's pay attention to those letters in red that you see. And let's look at a little bit of history when it comes to Jerusalem at that time. The first mention of Jerusalem in the Bible takes place in the book of Joshua. During one of the battles that Joshua had, he prayed that the sun and the moon would stand still so that he could finish that battle that day. And they did. Well, that was a battle that Joshua fought against an alliance of several kings. And those kings were led by the king of Jerusalem at the time. Now, the battle was at Gibeon. So even though Joshua won that battle, they didn't take over Jerusalem yet. In fact, even though Joshua and the Israelites took over the promised land that God had given them, they never dislodged the Jebusites from Jerusalem at this time. In Judges 1:21, we read this. But the sons of Benjamin did not drive out the Jebusites who lived in Jerusalem. So the Jebusites have lived with the sons of Benjamin in Jerusalem to this day. Now when it says to this day, it's talking about obviously when the book of Judges was written. So this was still true when David comes onto the scene. The Jebusites are still there. So there must have been some type of peaceful arrangement or agreement made between the Israelites and the Jebusites for them to coexist together. In fact, we even read in the Bible that after David kills Goliath and he cuts off his head, he takes the head to Jerusalem, where the Jebusites were. I don't know why. So why take over Jerusalem? Why would David's first big act as king be to attack and conquer the city where they appeared to be living in peace together? There are some good reasons for this. First of all, God had given this city to the Israelites. This is part of the land, the promised land. This had been given to the Israelites as part of their inheritance in the promised land. Specifically, the city of Jerusalem had been given to the tribe of Benjamin. It's interesting to me that King Saul happened to be from the tribe of Benjamin. You would think that Saul would have wanted to take what rightfully belonged to him and was given to him and his tribe by God, especially the type of person he was, as jealous as he had become, and as how much anger he could get towards enemies and other people. So you would think that Saul would have done that, but we have no evidence. We see nothing that leads us to believe that Saul ever tried to do anything like that. So it kind of makes sense to me that after decades, really, of them living together within this land now, peacefully with the Jebusites, that they had just grown accustomed, really, to having them there. It wasn't a problem. And so maybe it just, at this time, didn't seem like a big deal that the Jebusites were still in control of such a great fortified city of Jerusalem. But David would disagree with that, and so would God. Yes, things had been peaceful, obviously, but God had actually commanded the Israelites to completely destroy the Jebusites, all the way back when Moses was still alive. And they were given their orders. This, in Deuteronomy 20, verses 16 through 18. Only in the cities of these people that the Lord your God is giving you as an inheritance, you shall not leave alive anything that breathes, but you shall utterly destroy them. The Hittite, the Amorite, the Canaanite, the Perizzite, the Hivite, and the Jebusite, as the Lord your God has commanded you, so that they may not teach you to do according to all their detestable things which they have done for their gods, so that you would sin against the Lord your God. Now, to some people, that would seem just cruel, right? That God would tell them to utterly destroy them. Don't leave anything there alive. But God had his reasons for this. For one, God's the creator of all, which means that he's in control of all things. But also, God is the judge, the only judge over his creation. And he gave the orders that they were to utterly destroy anything that breathes, including those Jebusites that lived in Jerusalem. But here we are decades later, and they're still there. Now, God makes it clear why this needs to be done. In that 18th verse right there that you see, his reason is obvious and it's simple. God was executing judgment on their sinful ways, and he was commanding complete removal of them, because if they remain there, when God knows that if they remain there, then God knows that Israel would at some point follow in their sinful footsteps. So what would happen if all of these wicked people who defied God remained in Israel? Well, the people of Israel would be influenced to live the same way. So God orders them to wipe them out. And that's exactly what happened later on. Years after David, the people of Israel began to follow the practices of idolatry that they saw in the people around them who were not Israelites. And eventually, the Israelites became as pagan and as sinful as the people God told them to destroy in the first place, because they didn't follow God's command. It goes back to the old saying that bad company corrupts good people. That's what happened with Israel throughout the Old Testament. Those are actually bad company corrupts good people. Those are the words of the Apostle Paul in 1 Corinthians 15:33. And it's true for us today, isn't it? We don't need to go on some holy crusade to remove all sinners from the face of the earth. We're not saying that. But we do need to be careful of who it is we allow to influence us. So who is it that influences us? Who is it that shapes us? And who is it that influences our kids and shapes them? You know, I'm sure we don't even realize it most of the time, but even in some of the things that we consider to be good for our children sometimes to watch, there's often some hidden messages in there that just aren't good for us and our kids. So much of our values in today's world and our core beliefs come from who we spend time with. But it's not only limited to who we spend time with on a regular basis. You know, it was really, I think, once that way for many of us when we were younger. It was a different world than it is now, wasn't it? So, of course, you're influenced by your friends and your family and your co-workers and teachers, and sometimes in great ways. But today, I think more than ever, I think we're influenced by things we watch on TV, by things we see on social media, or read in books, or see in movies, or hear in our music. So think about the things that we listen to or we watch on a regular basis. How much time do we allow these people to influence us? Hopefully they are things that influence us in the right ways. Because we typically give these people hours and hours each week, if not each day. And if we do that, we can't help but pick up on some of their beliefs, their values, their priorities. Now, it can be a good thing, right? Depending on who it is we're spending our time within our life with and watching in other areas and listening to. Because they'll either help us adopt more godly values in life, which can be a great thing, or it could be people who lead us to adopt worldly values that do not agree with the Word of God and what it teaches. That's what happened with the Israelites in the Old Testament. So let's watch our character and not let bad company corrupt good character. That was God's strategy with the Israelites, really. Don't leave these people around to influence you, because that bad company will corrupt you. So he tells them to remove the sinful influences that were among his people. And I think it's one of the reasons also that David chooses to attack Jerusalem. It needed to be done. That and the fact that it would be a great capital city because of the strength of it. So understand this. This was no easy task. Not in the eyes of men, anyway, as we're going to see. This would be considered too difficult for men. There were reasons why the Jebusites were still entrenched in this city. One is, obviously, the Israelites did not listen to God's command from the start. God commanded them what to do, and he led them through all the other battles, but for some reason, they let some people stay in the area, not just the Jebusites, but others as well. Another reason, I think, is they just forgot maybe that it was God's thing, that God would lead them and make it happen. But also, I think there was this reason. It was a well-defended fortress. When you go back to that 6th verse, notice the second part of it. It says, "And they said to David, you shall not come in here, but the blind and lame will turn you away, thinking David cannot enter here." See, the Jebusites knew it. They basically taunted David and just let David know that you can't overtake us. They said even the blind and lame can keep you out. They knew how fortified they were. They knew how difficult it would be for David to take this city. And that's probably a good reason of why David would want Jerusalem as his capital city in the first place, really. It would be a perfect place to reign from in Jerusalem and feel safe. It was secured, it was fortified. There were 3 deep valleys on 3 sides, which was just a natural barrier for people who would attack you. It had a great water supply, so they could withstand long attacks and not run out of water. And these Jebusites, they felt there was no way at all that David could get into that city and attack it. In their mind, even the lame and the blind could keep David and his men out. But this is what we read in the 7th verse. "Nevertheless, David captured the stronghold of Zion." That is the city of David. It's as simple as that. It must have been so easy. We don't even get a recap of how David did it. He says, nevertheless, he captured it. But here's something we need to remember. These Jebusites, they thought they were untouchable. They failed to realize that David was not fighting by himself. And I'm not talking about the great army of men he would have. David didn't need to form an alliance with other kings around him, even though this was a fortified city and the Jebusites were strong. David had God on his side. And the Jebusites, they weren't even thinking about it. Perhaps just as the Israelites had gotten comfortable living among them, maybe they had gotten too comfortable as well, the Jebusites, and about all that God had done for the Israelites. You think back to Jericho. Remember the first city that the Israelites attacked after they crossed the Jordan River, when they start taking over the promised land. The men in Jericho, all the people in Jericho were terrified. They were afraid because they knew they had God on their side, and they knew what God had already done. In Egypt, with the Red Sea and how God had provided for them in the wilderness for 40 years, they were terrified. I guess as time passed, these Jebusites didn't even think about that anymore. They weren't concerned about that. They didn't even think about God. But David, he knew. He always knew that God was with him. Remember, he knew this as a young boy, even when he was fighting Goliath. He knew that God was going to hand him over. Even then. And because of that, David was unstoppable. As a young boy, as a military man, a commander really in Saul's army. And then David conquered this city, Jerusalem. He expanded it, and he made it even stronger than before. He made it his home. That's what can happen with God. But what about us? You know, when we look at what David was able to do, I think it should give us a great lesson of encouragement. Because the same God is with us too. You know, we just finished our vacation Bible school with a theme called Road Trip. And the main point of that VBS was that no matter where we are in life, no matter what we're going through in life, God is with us. It doesn't mean that God's going to make it easy. That's rarely the case, right? That's typically not the case because God often puts us in cases where we are uncomfortable, places that are tough. So we have to learn to rely on Him and not try to do everything on our own. And when it happens, it feels like that we have our own fortresses to conquer, just like David did when tough things in life come. Maybe our fortress is a baggage, some baggage that we carry with us from our past experiences in life. Maybe for some people, our fortress is some failures or addictions of some sort. Maybe our fortress is health-related for ourselves or for people we love. There are all kinds of different fortresses that we face in life that aren't physical battles fought with weapons. There are all kinds of strongholds in our lives that try to overtake us. Things that we can't seem to get past or simply just don't know how to deal with. And sometimes all we can hear when those things happen, and sometimes all we can pay attention to are these voices that are like taunting us like the Jebusites. They tell us you can't accomplish it. You're not strong enough. And when that's happening, there's no doubt that it's our enemy, the devil, at work. Doing what he loves to do, constantly placing doubt in our minds. And it's easy to let that doubt settle in. He wants us to feel like we can never defeat our strongholds. We can never win the battles in our lives. And he's right in some ways. Because when things are tough, when we face tough challenges in life, our own strength, our own wisdom just isn't enough to get past it. But God can do it. Remember, He's always with us. The devil wants to put that doubt in our mind and make you think that you're doing it on your own and you can't do it. That you're just too weak. He wants you to take your mind off of the one who can deliver you. He's always with us. There's no fortress too strong. There's no valley too deep. There's no mountain too high. No problem too difficult that God can't overcome. That goes for us as individuals. It goes for us as the church. Now, it's important that we always recognize that this is God's church, right? We're just blessed enough to get to be a part of it. That He accepts us, even through our past. It's great to see a church grow in number. I mean, remember, though, that it's not our church, right? It's not about what we want or don't want. It's not about us establishing anything. It's about God working and working through us. And I'm glad we got a lot of people here who do just that. You see it in their volunteering and in their serving and in their love for each other. And anything great that happens in our lives or in this church is God's doing. It's always been that way. It always will, no matter how much we try to take credit for things. Because it's easy to try to take credit. And we're not here for our own egos. We're not here for our own satisfaction or our own personal enjoyment. We've got to understand that each time we gather, and whichever way we gather, whether it's this or vacation Bible school or midweek or an ice cream social or an out-of-school event, each time we gather, it's a time that we get to be together. One day, none of us who are in this room, part of this congregation, will be around. It's going to happen. One by one, our time will come. We'll no longer be here. So our responsibility, our role as Christians is not just to come to church to enjoy it or to come for ourselves. I mean, we need to get something out of it. We should enjoy it. We should. We should love it. But our responsibility is to help God's church grow. And our world has to get out of this mindset that says, how much can this church benefit me? That's the mindset people have. That's never been God's intention for the church. But we've made it that way. God intends for us as the church to be a blessing to others. We exist to love and to serve. And we can never lose sight of that. So, David had a big move when he took over Jerusalem and made it his capital, the capital of Israel. Now, when it comes to David and his big move, it was important for all of history, right? Jerusalem still sits as the capital of Israel today. It's known as the city of David. No wonder why. He's the one who finally does it. He's finally that one Israelite who does what God commanded them to do all along. Take over the city. So what we see once again here with David is David becoming a man after God's own heart. While others refused to do what God commanded them to do, for whatever reason, David stepped up and won with God by his side. And us today, all of us here, we face different battles than David did. Right? We're not going to go try to take over any cities. We face different battles. But it's important that we remember that these battles, they can be overcome because we have God with us. That's how David went throughout. We get lots of opportunities to be together. And when we do, we always have a chance to make big moves for God. I want to thank you for joining us here for our 6th week of this King David series. Perry keeps asking me, how long is it going to be? How long is it going to be? And I'm like, I don't know yet. Because I'm reading through there and I'm like, I wasn't planning on doing this one. And I was reading through it and I was like, well, I like that story, so I'm going to do that. But I don't know. I'll cut it off at some time. but there's so many interesting stories in the life of David and so many lessons through this life. And you begin to see why he's known as a man after God's own heart. We know he's got mistakes. We're going to get into that. We know he failed God. We know he wasn't perfect, which nobody is. But boy, you see the humility. You see the self-control that he had, his love, his compassion, his honor and devotion to God and what God said to be done. You see that overall. No wonder he's known as a man after God's own heart. And it'd be great for each of us to be known that way. And I know we've got a lot of people here who live wonderful lives, and we love to watch it. We love to see it at work. It's not talking about at work, but just as you do your things for God. It's exciting. If you've never taken that opportunity to become a child of God, to accept Him as Lord and Savior, you have that opportunity to always do that. said, one day we're not all going to be here. We'll all be gone. And we have to leave a legacy by growing God's church so that others continue to build God's kingdom. If you've never made that decision to become a child of God, to put your faith in Jesus Christ, to trust Him, to confess Him and repent and be immersed, you always have that opportunity to do so. Reach out to us. Make it happen. We're going to sing a hymn of invitation here this morning. Our hymn of invitation is going to be song number 208, Let Jesus